On July 15, 2001, a Falcon 800X Flight 2121 was going from Fenwell International Airport to Greater International Airport. This plane was a private jet plane that been in service for about 2 years now. In 2001, this plane was doing its final services before being retired for services. It was taxied to runway 06R, but one of the passengers almost missed the flight, which is named Ken. Ken was on its late job flight. He almost missed flight 2121. But then there was a problem that's going to be laying ahead of them very soon, because they don't know what will happen until disaster struck. This plane had to wait 15 minutes. Finally, Ken was on flight 2121, and the plane was now taxied to runway 06R. Finally, the plane was on runway 06R. But then disaster almost struck. Rest in peace, which is RIP Dragon, almost hit flight 2121 as flight 1860 races off the runway at about 215 knots per minutes per hour. But then they hit one of the tail of the plane and didn't know that the plane was taking off. They called for emergency services, but it's gonna be too late for them to take off. Suddenly, passengers felt a heart deep up the air so fast. And now the plane was headed on its way to Greenville Iceberg International Airport. It was a few miles from Greer Airport, between Fenwell International Airport and Volcano Palma. But then Flight 2121 starts shaking back and forth, wagging the hostess and food carts. But they didn't know that the tail was going to get worse. The plane starts deeper down in a nosedive, heading towards the water at over speeds of 450 miles per hour. Flight 2121 controls starts alerting the passengers of the ongoing disaster. The control panel starts shaking badly, and the speed rapidly starts losing and starts losing. The plane wasn't going high enough. As Flight 2121 trying to control, it was still going out of control, and they were right on runway 60F. 60F was open for Greenville Iceberg International Airport. People can see the horrifying sights from the houses and mountains. They can see Flight 2121 is about to crash. They were not going to make it, and they were going to crash very soon. The plane was on the ground. It was trying to make a landing, but disasters will be striking very soon. Flight 2121 hits the runway ground, still going high speeds, and they're trying to slow down, but the hydraulic systems fails to do so. Now the plane wasn't going to save its own self, but it was not going to save its innocent lives. Back and forth for hours and minutes, passengers are starting to feel sick and starting to almost die because the plane kept hitting the ground and starting to shake. For its innocent lives, Flight 2121 was not going to make it. Soon they were lost all engines, hydraulic systems, controls, and fuel. And they're going to crash very shortly in hours. They're trying to make their plane make it to the safest landing as possible before it could be fatal. The next thing they're trying to do is slow it down, but it'll make more worse that it will make it speed up. It will start to pull up. It will keep stalling and stalling until it loses all fuel. That it can stall and lose all engines and try to see who can land at. But there's nothing to save Flight 2121. It was still on the ground, shaking violently, trying to make it to the airport. And sadly, the pilots are trying to make it. One of the dirt pilot passed out and unconscious after hitting the ground hard. And now the plane was heading towards the water. They tried to pull up the gear and they finally did it. But the plane was soon out of control because one of the speed moderators starts going off as alert alarm. There was nowhere to save Flight 2121. There were no fighter jets to pull the plane to safety, which is for their fuel. But nothing to save Flight 2121. It was still going out of control at about 200s, about 50 feet. plane was starting to lose all stalls, including gear failure. They kept losing during takeoff and landing. Flight 2121 was trying to make it for the first landing or fifth time landing. They were 129 miles away from other airports. As the plane kept shaking to the ground, it dips over on its side, skirting down the snow and trying to make it. But Ken was trying to force them to turn off all gears and all warnings and all flight controls, but didn't listen to him. Still, the plane was going out of control. It was 424 miles away from another safety airport. They were not going to make it because fuel was about to run out. And they were heading towards the city in ice and landings. They were not going to make it on time because Flight 2121 was going to lose all controls. It could die out, it could crash and explode. But that's what exactly was going to happen because Flight 2121 lost all its controls, failures, and all things that could event this disaster. They were 100 miles away from other airports and emergency services there. Once again, the plane hits the ground and starts shaking violently as passengers get knocked and down into the window. One of the two passengers got hit in the window and starting to get their face scratched off and hurt. One of the legs of the one passengers broke after hitting the door very hard, which is one of the guardians, and the plane wasn't going to make it. There were 20 seconds before disaster was about to strike very soon. Rest in peace, which is RIP Dragon, sees the horrifying sight of Flight 2121. The plane hits the ground again, flipping over, and they were now headed towards a disaster lane ahead. They were heading to a cargo shipping, which is in the water right now. They were heading straight for it, a 15 mile or 20 miles away. They were not going to make it. They kept trying to control it. But Ken, for example, was screaming and trying to pray for their lives. But Ken wasn't going to see their families ever again because they were 2- miles feet away from the water. They kept dipping towards the water, and dipping towards the water, getting closer to the ground. Disaster was getting closer and closer and closer as there were between 20 seconds before disaster could strike. But Flight 2121 was getting closer and closer and closer and closer. Seconds, and then the horrifying sights came in. Flight 2121 sadly lost after 1 hour and 50 minutes. It lost all controls and ended up burning to flames and erupted a whole nature of animals in that water. A total of all 125 passengers, or all the passengers, were all dead, and crew and members and the pilots. After the crash decided, that plane was taken out of service, which is the Falcon 8X. It was scrapped soon as it was being scrapped due to data of the speeds and controls and worst made plane. After the crash decided that accident, it was still a history about Flight 2121.